that mere fears, this is a citation from the leading, a leading case from 2001, that mere complaints and fears of neighboring property owners do not provide the material evidence necessary to support a board's denial of an otherwise proper request. And yet that doesn't make your job easier when you're faced with people who are concerned about what might happen in the future. I'd just like to make a couple of points because Mr. Nixon was so articulate last time. I know you have evaluated this. Staff recommends it. You've read the staff report. I'd like to make sort of one general observation and ask, which I think is how sometimes we lose track, those of us who are involved in land use decisions. It's become so common that I think sometimes we forget or we overlook the fact that what you have with that a property owner owns a piece of property, and in the absence of zoning regulations, that property owner would be able to do whatever he or she wanted to do with that property. And in fact, for that reason, the courts, the land use decisions which are given to the local governing body by the legislature need to be done with great care. And to quote from this same case, to talk about how what's the rationale for zoning? Well, the rationale is that local governments need to be able to encourage development through the use of planning and zoning measures. And the most compelling reason that this rezoning should be done from office to commercial is that it is consistent with the long-range plan that this board has adopted. I know historically, a couple of years ago, you hired a consultant to propose a long-term plan. That was evaluated by the Planning Commission. That was then evaluated and approved by this body. And the rezoning is perfectly, you'll see on the map that this proposed rezoning from office to commercial is consistent with that plan. What you do here is going to sets precedent for the future, because if someone can't rely upon the town's own plan, and every time something comes up, is someone going to be willing to invest in the town of Farragut? The second point I'd like to make is that it's consistent with a prior decision made by this board, by the town recently as you may remember, that this parcel is next to Tennessee State Bank. And very recently, the parcel on the immediate opposite side was rezoned just as we're requesting from office to commercial. You'll see the C1 there on Parkside Drive. So there is precedent for doing property exactly what the applicant is requesting. The third point is, and Mr. Nixon may be able to give you more specifics, but he mentioned last time that at present with an office zone, the town will not and is not generating any income. But with a commercial use, the town, he estimated, if my notes are correctly, that the gross receipts from a restaurant, if that's what comes, and there is no particular tenant who's been located, but something like $2 to $3 million in gross revenue, which the taxes of which then come to the town. And the fourth point, and I think this is the most significant for purpose if I were in that community and concerned about this, this is the one that would be crucial to me. That area has a buffer zone, a tree buffer. It's been installed. I walked up there today. If anybody had been looking, they would have seen me almost fall on my face trying to walk through the snow, but to see what it looks like. And it is presently a thick buffer of 100 feet separating the neighborhood from this development. And as Mr. Nixon indicated at the last meeting, there's a wooden fence on one side, which you see there. The developer is willing to extend that fence and put in additional undergrowth, additional landscaping to further buffer the area. It is a hard thing you do, but there are times when the planning just makes absolute sense and a rezoning, and this is one of those times. We're here to answer any questions you have. As I said, Mr. Smith is here, and I don't know if you want to hear from him next as the owner. He's from Cincinnati and came down. This is such a significant decision for you that he came down, and he'd like an opportunity to speak briefly.
Good evening. I am Jeff Smith with Fifth Third Bank. I'm in the Corporate Facilities Department and Regional Real Estate Director for Fifth Third. Just wanted to get in front of you today because we purchased this property back in '08 with the intent to develop it for a branch. But after the downturn, many financial institutions have taken a different look on how many branches they need due to so many other, electronic banking and mobile banking, that we just don't need as many banking centers, brick and mortar, as we did in the past. So we've decided to divest this property, and this group has our full support in doing that, and we support the rezoning because there is just not an office use for this property as it's currently zoned. These guys are quality developers and good partners with Fifth Third, so we wanted to make sure that we had somebody that was a solid partner that could actually perform and do what was right for this site. I am willing to answer any questions that anybody has. If there's anything else I could potentially add. Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your consideration.
Do you want to talk? Mayor, did you need any comments from staff at this point? Or we also have some public comment cards from the public that would like to speak.
But I thought we'd take up next.
I have a question for staff. What is the, with the proposed use on this lot, what will the rear setback be?
With the proposed zoning?
Yes.
Well, they have a 100-foot buffer zone, which obviously they can't encroach into. So effectively, they have a 100-foot setback currently from the rear property line. So there wouldn't be an additional setback from that zoning line.
Okay, so in other words, they could build right to that, to the edge of the buffer?
To the zoning line, yes, because that's a separate zoning district there, yes.
Okay, so that effectively is, so it's a 100-foot setback. And what's the residential setback in Sweetbriar? Is it 25 foot?
25.
You know how close any of those homes are to that? If they're within the, more than 25, or?
I would guess that, and this is just purely a guess, that most of them are probably slightly more than 25. Most houses are constructed, in excess of the setback requirements. So I'm pretty confident that the vast majority of the houses back there are probably much more than 25 feet, or more than 25 feet.
Is there any of the homeowners here that your homes are from the actual property line?
At least 25 feet, probably 40.
Okay, 20.
I think ours is probably about 25 because we put an addition that goes back.
Okay, as far as you could get, probably, yeah, okay. Thank you.
Well, let's hear from those who signed up.
Okay. Our first speaker tonight is Ken Chipley. If you could state your name and address for the record, please, when you step up.
And I would encourage everyone who wants to speak to try to limit your time to about 5 minutes.
I'm Ken Chipley, 11602 Gates Mill. I am the treasurer of the Sweetbriar Homeowners Association. Bob Edlin is tied up in some kind of Y12 meeting downtown, so he couldn't be here tonight. His wife's here. And I guess at this time, could I get all the Sweetbriar residents to stand and give us a show of how much people think about this? So that's who we are. Thank you. Have a seat. The annual association meeting was held on January 10th, 2015 at the library down there. This rezoning issue was discussed extensively at that meeting. Everyone is concerned that the additional adjacent commercial development will cause decreased home values and and for those, not just for those that are closest, but also for the entire neighborhood eventually. We can live with the office buildings as zoned, but we do not want any more commercial development adjacent to our subdivision. We do appreciate that Jim Nixon came down and he briefed several of the homeowners that were most directly affected by the rezoning request, we really appreciate Jim doing that. But in the meantime, we told him at the time that there would have been much support. A motion was made at our meeting and unanimously passed to oppose this change in zoning for the property. We spoke 4 weeks ago at the MPC meeting, and this zoning was discussed extensively at that time at the MPC meeting, and it failed by 7-0 or whatever the number was. It was. So the MPC people thought about it in the same regard that you did and decided this was not in the best interest of the Farragut. I apologize that we failed to recognize that it was appealed. We didn't see those little blue signs, and so we didn't get down here for the Board of Appeals meeting. They're little blue signs that are about this big, about rectangle, about like that, and they're posted on the edge of the property when they do this. And on Turkey Creek, on Parkside Drive.
The homeowners weren't told directly.
The ones that were adjacent to the property may have gotten a letter. That's the, no letter, well, okay. Let me continue on then. The association actively negotiated with Knoxville, Knox County, and Farragut during the 1980s, 1990s to do our best to protect the already developed neighborhood. We were there before, and while allowing the development of Turkey Creek Shopping Center. We did not get everything we wanted at that time, but we were satisfied that we could live with the commercial development on most of Parkside Drive as long as the backyard faced into an office environment. This is not the time to break that agreement from the 1990s. We do acknowledge that the rezoning of the property at Panda Express entirely escaped our attention until the construction had almost started. We should have been paying closer attention to those little blue signs at the time. And maybe we should make this thing brighter or put lights on them or something. Oh. If the adjacent neighbors received written notices at that time when Panda Express was done, they certainly did not spread the word. And we apologize for not being down here about the Panda Express thing. I was down here with some Boy Scouts when you got the final building locations and the driveway laying out and that sort of thing. But by that time, it was way too late. So I apologize for not recognizing the Panda Express thing, and we should have been down here in big numbers, but we just missed it. However, there are some differences between this property and the Panda Express property. There is a big retention pond behind both it shows up right there, big retention pond in behind both the TVA buildings and the Panda Express, and that greatly increases the total buffer space between our backyards and the buildings. But even with those increased distances, the neighbors will tell you already that the smell, the noise, and the lights associated with the commercial Panda Express thing are already causing problems for the nearby homeowners. Smell is pretty bad from the dumpsters. Please note from the map that the property being considered today is the most shallow of the lots all the way between Parkside and our subdivision. That's the pinch point between Gates Mill and Parkside Drive. That's the most shallow lot that's along there. And so that means that whatever they build will probably be pushed right up against the buffer. I mean, it's not going to be any distance between the building, between the buffer and the dumpsters probably. Similar to the Silver Spoon property, the neighbors are very concerned about drive-throughs from fast food type properties around the back, and they're, by y'all's definition, they're going to be behind the store generally. So, on a personal note, I think this rezone would be a serious breach of trust for the entire Sweetbriar neighborhood. I started to work at R&L in '74, and I moved to Gates Mill in '87 from a house that was on Level Road over there. A primary reason that I moved to there was I trusted the Farragut MPC and the board to treat the homeowners with some respect and not allow commercial interest to overpower the residents. We had already observed the misbehavior of the 19-person Knox County commissioners back then and the lack of power that their MPC had to control commercial development. And quite frankly, in '87, I was sick of it. It went to Farragut to get away from that. As with many of the neighbors, we felt confident enough recently to do major upgrades to our house in 2010 and 2014. It's totaled almost $200,000. Way more than what we paid for the house. I was confident because Parkside development was almost complete and the area seemed very stable. Many of the houses along Gates Mill adjacent to this property have upgraded similarly because of the same stable environment that we expected. My wife is considering doing some more work, opening up the den and living room and making an open concept type thing there with new hardwood. Frankly, I'm probably not going to do that if this passes, because this will seriously discourage me putting any more money in that house. So for all those reasons, thank you. I know we've got at least one other person that we talked about is going to speak, so I appreciate your attention.
Thank you.
Speaker tonight is Deborah Raines.
My name is Debbie Raines, and I live at 11 Briar. My is to be rezoned. We're right in that pinch point. As with Ken, I apologize for missing the first reading. We did not realize we didn't hear anything when the Planning Commission meeting was taking place. We did get a letter, and we appreciated that. And I have to say that Jim, there he is. Jim did come and meet with us, and Jim actually came to our home and went out and looked with his landscaper at what could be done to put in a fence and a buffer zone back there, more plantings and so on. But I have to say that my greatest concerns are not going to be addressed by a fence and some more plantings. We're concerned with the noise. We're concerned with the smells. We're concerned with our property values. Those aren't things that you can fix with a fence and a bunch of trees. Right now we look at the Best Buy sign, so a fence would be appreciated. But I've been actually out talking to our neighbors along Gates Mill all the way down to the end and back around. I haven't found one person that knew about the rezoning of that lot. So no one in our neighborhood was aware that that rezoning was happening. And like Ken said, yeah, we should be reading those blue signs a little more carefully. But we were totally blindsided. And I can assure you, had we known about Panda Express before it went in, we would have fought it. We would have fought it because it is impacting our quality of life. We can, even at our house, and you can see we're about 6 or 7 lots down from that. We can smell it. We can hear the dumpsters. We know what time the dumpsters go. I don't remember what time it was this morning. It was sometime between 4. Okay. I was going to say it's between 4 and 5. And I don't always wake up. I won't say I wake up every morning, but look at where my house is and look where those dumpsters would be. You know they're right up against that back wall. That's where the dumpsters are on a property. They are going to be right next to where, 35 yards away from our bedroom window. We live on the back of our house. We have our master bedroom. We have a brand new kitchen that literally, it's so ironic, the remodel was finished the week that we got the letter that the rezoning was under consideration. And as Ken said, Sweetbriar is a destination neighborhood. It might not be that to some people, but the people that live there, we move in and we stay. We've been there 18 years. A lot of our neighbors were there before we were. Our neighbors, Ron and Kelly, have been there about 16 and a half years. When they moved in, they called the town hall. They knew the road was going through. And so they said, what's going in back there? And Ruth Hawk told them, if you can live with a 3-story office building behind your house, you'll be happy. And that was the commitment that was made to our neighborhood, was that because, and even at the Planning Commission meeting, we had a couple different people who said, yeah, you know what, I remember being in that meeting, and the pinch, and that place where Gates Mill comes up like this, and Parkside comes across, you can see how narrow it is. And you know that that building is going to be right back against our property. But, you know, I guess our major concerns are a drive-through, a building that's got a drive-through. The model that Jim told me, he said something he was considering, and again, he said, you know, I don't know what I'm going to put in for sure, but I am looking restaurant. He referenced the Einstein Bagels building. And, you know, that size building wouldn't be bad on that lot, but my first thought was, myself in my place, I'm back on my patio or on my deck in the summer, and am I going to be hearing, may I have your order, please, over and over all day, and hearing cars, you know, 35 yards from my yard? You know, it just doesn't sound very attractive to me. You know, if you went to the other extreme, what if we end up with something like a sports bar or even just a full-service restaurant? Then you're talking about alcohol, which brings in a whole new set of issues. We've got late nights. We've got maybe loud music. You can ask anybody here. We can already hear the Wild Wings Cafe, and that's already, you know, up there by Interstate 40. And you can, you know, we are already feeling the impact from Panda Express, from Irish Times, from Calhoun's. And we don't need one more thing in our backyards. We just don't. My neighbor Kelly and I did a little drive yesterday, and we just drove through Turkey Creek. You know, we looked, of course, we've walked the fence line. And there are 17 empty commercial lots in Turkey Creek right now. 17. Commercial, not office, commercial. And it's 21 if you add in those spaces over there behind the Walgreens. So it isn't like there's not some commercial space available up in Turkey Creek. But once it's zone commercial, we lose all control over what goes in there. Jim might be extremely careful about what he builds, who he brings in there, but then maybe it's going to get sold, and we have no idea what could end up behind us. And it's just a real concern for all of us. Tim and behind the Panda Express, they're still waiting for their fence and their extra trees that were promised. They're open right up until that property. But that was supposed to be part of the deal, is that there was supposed to be a fence there. There's no fence. Now, I'm not saying that has anything to do with Jim Nixon. I don't know who developed that property. But what I do know is that they were told that there would be a fence, and there's not a fence. One of the biggest things to us is that there was a commitment made to our neighborhood. Some people have asked us, do you have that in writing? Well, no, I don't have it in writing. I didn't live here when that agreement was made. I can tell you that my neighbor Ed Glass, when he was still here, he would have had that in writing. But the point is, I haven't had anybody dispute that the commitment was made. There was a commitment made to our neighborhood that would remain office, that would remain a non-commercial area because it was so close to our homes. And what we see here is that the people that are being asked to make the sacrifice are getting none of the benefit. The people that are getting the benefit are making none of the sacrifice. We're the ones that are sacrificing, but we don't get the benefit. And if you would just, for a moment, just, you know, think about your own. Put yourself at your back door or maybe on your deck and think about what you're seeing, what you're smelling, what you're hearing. Right now, I hear 40, here Parkside. But those office buildings, we don't even know they're there. We see them. you know, but it's just a wall. There's nothing that goes on in the back of those buildings. We don't have any impact from those buildings. But I think it would be very different if we had a restaurant or other commercial property right behind us. So as far as I'm concerned, that what this comes down to is it's a matter of honor. It was a commitment that was made to our neighborhood to preserve our quality of life, to leave that strip as office, commercial. And we would have fought it if we had known. And that's probably our fault for not finding out. But this is a matter of honor. Are you going to honor the commitment that was made, whether it's in writing or not? You know the commitment was made to our neighborhood. We were there before Turkey Creek. Or are you going to go ahead and change the zoning? And I know that there have been some comments about, well, we have to think about, you know, the good of the town and the good of everybody. This is your town. We're your town. We're part of it. And we're your residents. And our quality of life should matter for something. I know that there has to be progress, but we just don't think this is the best way to go about doing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
More person that turned out a speaker card, and that's for Doug Warner.
I really don't have much to add to what they said. Ken and Debbie have said it all. The town made a commitment to the residents. This is a question of promises broken. The town of Farragut was formed as a residential community to stop the sprawl of Knoxville. You're breaking that promise. You're breaking the promise of putting in office buildings where you promised us that you would have them, and now you're breaking that. And our friends in the back, they make a good point. It's $2 million. But it's $2 million from us to the suits. And that makes me angry.
Anybody else want to say anything? Would you come down here, state your name and address?
I live at 11302 GM Dumpsters. If I said, mention in there, these guys come in and I've called the dispatcher who was a bit of a jerk about it. The driver's just a guy making a living. Why in the world? We sleep there. My bedroom is maybe about 50 yards from where they keep the dumpsters. My 7-year-old gets up into my bed and wakes me up about somewhere between 4 and 5 usually. We really aren't having any luck with getting waste when people aren't asleep or early evening. If you guys, I don't know what hours they can do that, but you know, they wouldn't do that by a hotel, would they? If you could do something, it would be greatly appreciated. That's all I have to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, let me make one comment, and that is the state offices would not contribute any tax money to the town. That is just not true, because the offices have people in them, and the people go out to lunch, and they go to lunch someplace close by, and that happens to be in Farragut. They probably go to the store to buy whatever. They probably go to Walmart to buy whatever, because they're spending a lot of time right there in Turkey Creek. And so we don't see that as a net revenue loss. I don't. We're actively seeking people to come in and open businesses in office buildings. In fact, we've had 2 recently open up. Perceptics decided to come to Farragut, and Southeast Bank decided to have their headquarters in Farragut. Both of those are large numbers of employees, 100 or so in each one. They do the same thing. They go to lunch, they go shopping, they may even buy a house and move here. All of that is revenue. It may not be sales tax on what the business in the office building does, but it still is revenue. So I don't buy that argument. And the fact is that part of our strategic plan is to go out and recruit more office buildings. Not just, we're aggressive about commercial, and we're becoming aggressive about offices also. And that's my sermon.
Would like to hear from the staff, the reasons why they recommend approval of this ordinance.
Well, from the staff's perspective, we look at any rezoning request that comes before initially the Planning Commission and it's forwarded to the board. We look at our comprehensive plan for guidance, because that's what, the community had expressed when it was developed, that they envision the future of the town to look like. That doesn't mean that it's something that can't change over time, but that's all that the staff can go by. So when we got the request, the rezoning request, as we would with any rezoning request, we compared the request to, first of all, we looked at the predominant plan of development along Parkside Drive. It's obviously commercial. There are some office buildings, but the predominant plan of development is commercial. And then we looked at the future land use plan map in our comprehensive plan, and it calls for commercial on both sides of the Parkside Drive corridor. We also look at, in addition to the comprehensive plan, we look at other applicable plans and documents that have been vetted through the board and commission and public. The strategic plan is another example. We see that the rezoning request advances certain components of the strategic plan, specifically, as we pointed out last time, Goal 2, strengthening the local economy, providing for, increase the sales tax base and revenues for the town. We're a sales tax dependent municipality, and we have to think about those things when properties are requested to be changed that could affect the tax base. And then also Goal 4, Objectives 5 and 6, which encourage following and being consistent with adopted plans and policies. And, of course, our comprehensive plan that was approved in December of 2012, again, we're trying to promote consistency with that plan. And that's the staff's perspective on this. We certainly understand the comments that have been made, but we have to look at it from, a professional planning perspective and give you and our opinion on the request before you.
Thank you. I would like to find out about what happened behind Panda Express. That Jim, was that anything that had to do with you, and why hasn't that been taken care of?
Jim Nixon, Farragut Land Partners. We didn't have anything to do with that deal and did not own that ground. If you're so kind as to rezone this property here, I will put that fence and I will put those undergrowth plantings underneath those trees as dense as I can possibly make it. And if you want me to post a bond in advance to guarantee they'll be in there, I'll do it. Now, as regards this commitment, Farragut Land Partners made a commitment to establish an area where offices could be built. We did that. Promise that we made to the Sweetbriar subdivision many years ago, adjacent to the city of Knoxville, unilaterally, without any return from the town or from the subdivision, to make it a 100-foot buffer zone from one end of the property to the other, which was not there when we bought this property. And we'll establish the fence to connect those two sections if we purchase this property. That's why we brought the guy from Cincinnati down here. He drove down here in the snow today to be able to express to you that this is not just some happenstance that we've thought up at the last minute. These guys believe in us, and we believe in them. And it's property from them. They're not going to use it. And we can find somebody to use it that will be a productive citizen of the town of Farragut. We haven't had anything to do with this property for many years, 10 or 12 years. We sold it to an office building developer who said he was going to build offices. Instead, he sold it to someone else, and they sold it to Fifth Third Bank. So the areas that we have had no request for a completely compatible rezoning, and we would ask for you to approve it.
Mr. Nixon, while you're at the podium, I've got some questions. The biggest complaint that I'm hearing is, one of the biggest concerns is drive-through. The second one is noise. And it seems like we have in this town 2 or 3 providers of garbage service. I know we've used several different ones. If somebody was behind my neighborhood at 4 o'clock in the morning crashing dumpsters, I think I'd be looking at boycotting that, whoever that is. And I don't know how many different suppliers, trash haulers do y'all have in your neighborhood, do you know? Okay. And I wonder if one of them is the offending party over behind you. So I don't think we have any authority, but certainly as a town we could complain if there's noise, unruly noise. That's something that could be addressed in a number of different ways. With your proposed or anticipated use of this site, what kind of a site plan at this point, or do you have any kind of a idea what sort of a setback they would want? What's going to be behind the building? Is there going to be parking behind it, in front of it?
At this point, we have no one committed to this property, and we could not commit to anyone. We don't own it yet. We do have a contract to purchase it. Fifth Third people have acknowledged that contract here tonight. You have a copy of it in your proposal. We would like to put a commercial use on it. We believe we can put a commercial use on it. We have a good track record of putting clean, good commercial uses. I don't know what the setback will be. I rather suspect it won't be back up against that buffer zone, because everybody likes to center their buildings, and that won't hold a big building. It's 2 acres, but as you know, most buildings go in the center with parking, or really what would happen there. I can't make any commitment because I don't know yet what we're going to do.
Well, talking about commitments, I heard from a lot of the folks in Sweetbriar that a commitment was made to you, that we're breaking a trust, that there's a breach of faith here. Who made this agreement, by what authority, and when?
My name is John, 341 Gates Mill Drive, and I'm one of the 2 guys who was in the room.
What room, sir?
Ed Glass is the other person who was with me. Ed is deceased. And we worked very closely with Jim. He spent as much time in my living room as anybody I know. He spent as much time in Ed Glass's kitchen as anybody I know. We worked with town staff. We worked with the town leadership, the mayor and board of aldermen at the time. It was very clear what was agreed on, and it was clearly expressed. They came back and asked us, would we support putting taller buildings in? We thought about that long and hard. Ed and I spent a lot of time thinking about that and talking to the neighbors. Jim asked us to support it, and after a lot of consideration, we said sure. We came down to the town meetings and we spoke. Ruth Hawk was one of the town people we worked with. Way before Ruth was a guy named Bill Hammond. There were others whose names, I'm sorry, I no longer remember. But we worked with all of them. We were held up as exemplars by the town after that meeting when the request was approved to change it from the elevations that it had been to allow the 3-story and in particular the 5-story. Eventually, the town gave Ed an accommodation award for all of his work with the town, and this was one of many things that Ed did. There is an irony that Ed's house is where Ed had lived is one of the houses that's now backed up against in his grave. But regardless of that, I can say I was in the room. Realized then what's happening now is that it only takes 3 people to vote for a change, and change happens. But clearly that was a promise that was made. Clearly that's why we agreed to support the development, and that's especially why we agreed to the 5-story office building, among other things. Can I answer other questions for you?
Yeah, I know you got it. There's a First Watch down there. There's a lot of other eating establishments backing up along there.
No, it's near Public, so it's way down beyond us on the other side of where Penny's and Heron Road. So that has nothing to do with us.
Okay, so once again, who made this promise?
The problem was made from on the perspective of the developers. It was certainly with Jim. The town, it was every member of the town planning staff at the time, and everybody that we worked with, and was there. The zoning is. That was the agreement.
When was this
Mid-90s.
approved? And this takes precedent, I would think, over any.
To the comment that Mr. Kelly made at the beginning of his remarks, if we can't rely on a town and its plans, what can we rely on?
Yeah, do we really need it? I was in these meetings too back then, and I confirm exactly what he said. This particular pieces of property are different than anything else in this development, because they came back to us and got that these particular properties were developed after the initial development, and they were we were assured these were going to be just office buildings, and specifically they told us they would never be restaurants. And I have pretty good memory. I'm pretty sure Mr. Nixon said this. I'm almost certain he did. So I'm surprised that he's forgotten.
Sir, do you mind giving us your name and address for the record, please?
My name is Bill Huxtable. I live at 1145 Gatesville Drive.
Thank you.
Which is right behind that big building there, which has been a joy. I haven't had problems at all.
So the Golden Corral, does that back up to
I don't know where the Golden Corral is.
Longhorn Steakhouse? Yeah.
Again, Longhorn is on the other side of Penny's.
That's not adjacent to our subdivision at all. That's the opposite side of Heron Road, which is the division between our subdivision and just houses on that side.
Essentially, it's Penny's. Heron Road is right through the middle of Penny's.
Yeah.
To the park side.
Right.
You know, I want to offer some commentary. First of all, I want to thank everybody for keeping your cool, because sometimes these things can get a little frothy, and I appreciate the professionalism. You know, everything that has been said tonight is true from everybody's individual perspective. The reality of it is Turkey Creek has been a godsend for our community. Without the revenue coming from that, we would have different discussions when it came to budgeting. Everything that Jim Nixon and others have done at Law and Order hasn't been good, Jim. It's been excellent. You've done a wonderful job. As you look at this, it's, in my opinion, and I wasn't involved in any of these conversations years ago, but it's quite evident what the intent was. I mean, this office zone through there was put there for a reason. And I certainly can't say what was said or wasn't said, but that appears to be what the intent was. As you look at this and the challenge from a longer-term perspective, as we rezone this, it's not what Jim may or may not build there today. It's what could come in the future. And that's one of the major challenges anytime we look at things like this. So, you know, personally, even though I have great respect for everything Jim Nixon has done in our community, and he's been a tremendous asset to our town as an individual, I just don't think this is a good fit, and I appreciate what everybody has said. I don't like the fact that we go from office to commercial back to office again. I can say from a personal experience, our community has a need for more office space.
And I just think this piece of property is perfect for it. So I'll leave my comments at that.
That's an interesting statement. What, 'cause my understanding is that there's a lot of office space sitting empty in town right now. Is it, anybody can address that?
A year ago, I hunted forever to find a spot. And the vast majority of what I could find was not within the boundaries of Farragut. And I purposely looked to build, or occupy space, I should say, in Farragut. And it came down, there was not a whole lot left.
Well, I've
But
heard,
irregardless, this piece of property, you can tell what the intent was, and I'm going to stick with that. So,
well, I've heard that, contrary to what you're saying, that there's a lot of vacant office space and we're overbuilt for office space right now. Mr. Nixon, any of you guys, can you address that?
I know the building that's adjacent has a large number of vacant spaces in it. I don't know how many, but it has substantial vacancy in it. That's the one to the right in the picture there. It has, yeah, it has different offices in it, yes.
So is there anyone that can address that? What occupancy rates are for office in town? Do we actually have a need? I mean, is there actually a crying need for it? Because that's not what I've heard. I've heard that we've got a lot of vacancies and nobody's planning on building any.
well, but you know, the point here, though, it isn't if we need an office or not. I mean, that would be like saying, well, we need to say we need another restaurant in town. I mean, that shouldn't be the decision for this piece of property. You know, at the end of the day, we need to say what's the right use for this piece of property. And regardless of what that use is, it will reach its full potential in due time. So, you know, I don't think it comes down to, do we have empty offices today? Do we have too many restaurants today or not enough? It comes down to what's the best use of this piece of property. And, you know, there was a reason that we didn't formally adopt the land use plan as a board, and it was to allow some flexibility. And since that time, for a certain part of our town, we have hardwired, I'll use that term perhaps a little loosely, for this, I guess it would be the town center district. There's different terms. So we have hardwired part of this plan to make sure certain things are done in certain parts of our community. But in this particular piece, the land use plan is not hardwired. It is used as a guide. And we have already made a couple of changes to that, because like almost every plan, it's good the day you do it and then things change. And we've used good judgment. A land use plan is a little bit different than a business plan, because you're looking at how you want your community to look in 20, 30, and 50 years, not over the next 3 to 5 years. But we are not change this to follow the land use plan, and the staff made the proper recommendation because they looked at it from a professional standpoint. Did it meet the intent? And in that regard, yes, it meets the intent. I argue from the point, is it a fit? And I would say it is not a fit.
Any more discussion, or is there a motion? The motion has to be in the affirmative.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Call the roll.
Please explain your motion.
The motion would be to approve the change. As we make our motions in the, what's motion in, then we vote on the motion, so.
I have one last question before we go to a vote. Is there any way we could deed restrict this property within the zoning that would not allow a drive-through? Because that seems to be one of the major complaints.
We could, you can condition the property. You've already put a couple of conditions on the property from first reading, and certainly you could put more conditions on the property that you felt were important as a board to put on it, no matter who owns it and no matter who develops it. So I would say, yes, you could do, if you wanted to, put a contingency on there or a condition on there that there would be no drive-throughs.
And Mr. Nixon, would you be would you be willing to buy this property if there was a condition on it that it would never have a drive-through in it?
Alderman, I think it's important that you realize that when you put a condition on something, you're putting it on there for whoever owns it, whether it be the current property owner, the future property owner, or whoever he sells it to as well. And so that there's not, basically you're imposing that on them as part of their property restrictions.
It's a formal deed restriction that you can't vote away.
Yes, sir, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've spoken with the folks that actually own the ground, the Fifth Third folks, and they would agree to that.
Well, I'm a big proponent of property rights, and everybody wants somebody else's farm to be their park. We'd all like for everything to stay bucolic and pristine, but this is a heavily commercial development, Parkside, which has been a real boon to the community, as has been said. And I think that every homeowner in Sweetbriar has benefited. I don't think anybody's property values have been diminished by development of Parkside Drive.
Sir, if you could speak at the podium, I'm sorry. Thank you.
I was trying not to do this. My wife and I, we bought the house in 2011 that's right across from Doug and them. And I can tell you, at that time, if I'd looked out and there had been a Panda Express in the backyard, we wouldn't have bought it. And that's where this is going to wind up going, is you're going to diminish the property values. One of the interesting things about the buffer and the office space, the way it's set up, was the uniqueness of how you could live in this residential area and not hear that you were right behind Turkey Creek. It was unique in the way that it was set up. The buffer space is great during the summertime, but if you were out there today and it's fall, you can see it's just open space. There's no limbs, there's no leaves, there's nothing buffering anything. You can hear it. And it's actually Buffalo Wild Wings that we can already hear that's on the other side of Parkside Drive. I can tell you that I can understand wanting to make the changes for property value and for making money and expenses and things like that, to turn it from office to commercial from their aspect. On our aspect is, as theirs goes up and they make money, our properties are going to go down, or they're going to plateau. Right now, I can tell you that, unfortunately, whoever lives behind that Panda Express, if they ever show that house right now during the heat of a summer month, that it's not going to bode well for who's going to buy it. And that's exactly what we're going to wind up having. We are in a unique circumstance. I wasn't around when the promises were made that I've heard about. I just know that that was the reason I moved there. That was the reason I bought that house. That's the reason. Another thing, I counted up in the picture that you have, you got about 20 kids in there too that are out and play and so forth and so on. And we like for them to have their independence and their playground and not realize the businesses and stuff that's going on right across the way. I would appreciate it if you would just vote to leave it the way it is, not make any changes, and let's enjoy what you guys have before us had already built. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I certainly understand. This is a very, it's an emotional issue. This is your backyard, and I understand that. But I think also we have to respect property rights and folks that own that property. I think it's gone above and beyond in making a commitment to not only build a fence take the visual aspect out of it, but to build a fence to Panda Express, which seems to be the biggest offender, and plant understory, and deed restrict the property that there would never be a drive-through there. And because of that, I think, we would like to impose our values on somebody else's property, but
We're not imposing our values. They bought that property with being office. They knew what they bought. They got it approved because it was office.
got what approved?
The current people buying, that zoning own it now, bought it knowing it was office. And so they know what they got. They're not changing it, we're not changing their right to do whatever they want with that building, this property, as long as it's within the existing zoning code. I agree with that. Absolutely. Remember, they haven't bought it yet. Yeah, I'm sorry the third bank, because the business went down and all that. Everybody got hurt a little bit in 2008. But they don't need to build their profits back up on our back.
We have a motion and a suggestion that there may be a stipulation. So where are we?
I'd like to make an alternate motion that we approve this zoning change with the stipulation that there will never be a drive-through on it, that it will be deed restricted, and that the purchaser will build a fence and provide further understory plantings for the Panda Express and for this property.
I'll second it.
Got that? Call the roll.
Alderman Honkin.
No.
Alderman LaMarche. Alderman Markley.
Yes.
Alderman Pinchuk.
Yes.
Mayor McGill.
No.
Motion passes 3-2.
Buy the property behind it and you're welcome to.
Yeah, and you're not looking at that big yellow Best Buy sign day in, day out, because that's what I see from my bedroom window.
What does that have to do with this?
Don't stop.
You should think about the amount of money that people in that community spend to take certain streets and the quality of the people you have here.
I've thought about that.
Your predecessors made a commitment, and you're not holding the trust. Nobody here is going to forget that, nor is the rest of the people when they go back and tell them.
All the plans that you talked about. Pardon?
I don't have any dog in that hunt.
Well, what you.
About that.
Absolutely, just what I did for Sugarwood when they were doing the dumpsters behind NHC.
All right, we're back in session. The next item is first reading ordinance 15-03 to amend Farragut Municipal Code by adding Title 14, Chapter 6, Farragut Architectural Design Standards, and authorizing the Farragut Municipal Planning Commission to be the Design Review Commission.
Okay, feel like we need a break after that one. Anyway, you all are familiar with this, but I'm really just going to kind of give you a brief overview and maybe talk about some of the things that a recap from the discussion we had on February 12th when their consultant made their last visit, and there were some items that were discussed. This process started actually several months ago, and the town contracted with Winter and Company out of Boulder, Colorado, to develop some architectural design standards for the town to try to help us advance our different elements of our comprehensive land use plan and our strategic plan. And since that time, we've had a number of public workshops. We've gotten a lot of comment from, and we've tried to incorporate all the feedback that we've received, and that's what's just to give you a little I guess legal background on this process. The Tennessee Code Annotated provides for communities to have the ability to develop these kind of standards, but they have to designate a design review commission, and they have to have an appellate body for that design review commission. Throughout the process of developing these standards, it was felt that the Planning Commission should be designated the design review commission. And since the Planning Commission would be that review body, the governing body, or the Board of Mayor and Aldermen in the case of Farragut, would be the appellate body. There are some communities out there that create their own design review commission as a completely separate entity, and in those cases the Planning Commission could serve as the appellate body. However, where the Planning Commission is designated to be the design review commission, the governing body is responsible for any appeals to the Planning Commission decisions. So that's kind of an overcap of the legal background and what we are required to include in our standards about the process. The process was something that in general we talked a lot about. There are certain projects that the staff can review and approve, minor projects. We, of course, do have the authority, the ability to, even on minor projects, if we're not, 100% comfortable with rendering our own separate decision, we can send that on to the Planning Commission for their opinion. The VRB, the Visual Resources Review Board, will still do the same thing they've been doing. They'll be reviewing landscape plans and sign applications as provided for in the sign ordinance. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the Planning Commission will be the primary review body for the architectural design standards. Do you all have any questions about the design review board roles? We've kind of talked about these quite a bit, but I just want to be clear on everything. And this is another page from the design standards that basically helps an applicant step by step through the design review process. We're hoping to work with our consultant on developing a checklist that will help the staff, the commission, and applicants certainly on navigating through these standards, because it's over 80 pages. It's a large document. We're hoping to be able to simplify it and to make the review process much more streamlined and simple. And this is kind of a flow chart in that regard that shows the review process, who can approve different things, what the next step is if something's approved or not approved. Another thing that we talked about at some depth, and when our consultant was here on February 12th at the workshop, was building materials. We had a lot of discussion about what type of materials do we want to see on new construction in the town of Farragut. And what we asked the consultant to do was to go back and establish what would be considered primary building materials. That would be those materials that would satisfy our masonry percentage requirements, and I'll go over those in a minute. And then the A there are accent materials that would be secondary to the primary materials. Some materials can be both primary and accent, but then some can only be accent. One of the things that we talked about was, detailed concrete. That's shown as both an accent and a primary. That's where it's detailed, concrete's detailed in modules to be very similar in appearance to brick or stone, as opposed to CMU type of concrete that would not be considered an acceptable primary material. Synthetic stone, we also had a pretty detailed discussion about that. That is just an accent material that would not satisfy the standards as a primary material. It has to be masonry type stone to qualify for that. And then the other materials there, I think, were pretty much unchanged. Stucco and concrete and metal are just purely accent materials. When this was presented to the Planning Commission last Thursday, they felt like the consultant had addressed the vagueness in some of the previous language as it dealt with building materials. But I did want to point that out and make sure you all are comfortable with what's being presented in the standards, and that it gives the staff and the decision makers the ability to clearly assess an application in terms of compliance with building materials. Do you all have any thoughts on this, or does this look acceptable?
Yeah, Mark, what comes to mind is this is going to apply to any future non-residential construction in town, right?
Basically, it would apply to any new construction that's not single or two-family residential, yes.
It'll probably rule out some uses just from an economic standpoint. I mean, warehouse, muffler shop, kind of things that we're going to have some pretty upscale warehouses and muffler shops,
well,
I think.
Yeah, if they can meet the standards, they can do it.
I just want to be careful that we don't rule out certain uses that may be desirable that may not be appropriate for them to meet those standards. And I don't know exactly what that might be, but I think we need to be conscious of, I think Ms. Hawk used to call unintended consequences.
Yeah.
And so I can't think of a particular use right now where it may be inappropriate to impose these standards. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say one thing in response to that is, and this is another page from the standards, this talks about the percentage requirements for new construction. And that 60% net facade area for a single-story building, that's the net facade area, so you get flexibility in how you allocate the materials around that building. My guess is that oftentimes buildings could be much greater than 60% on the more visible elevations, and they may be less than 60% on some of the less visible elevations.
This net facade, I was thinking the facade, the face, the front of the building.
That's the front, yes, front on look at the building. It would not include offset areas. It's just if you're looking at the front of the building, you take the net, it's the net facade area, excluding the windows and doors.
Right. So back and sides?
Yeah, it's the net facade area of all elevations, yes. As looked
But
on
not just the
straight
front.
on from each elevation. Yeah,
Okay.
yes. And that's the percentages that we've talked about, where if it's a single-story building, it's 60% net facade area, and then if it's a multiple-story building, it's 75% on the first floor, and then 60% on the non-ground floor. Is that everybody good with that? And we increased that substantially, actually, from what the consultant originally proposed. I think it was in 40 something. Yeah, because again, we're thinking about this as a town-wide application. Now, in the mixed-use town center area, those new construction in that area has to follow a much higher standard. % face brick on all elevations. Each elevation has to be at least 75% face brick.
So, facades, even to the back of a building that's facing like what we just talked about here, a 100-foot buffer strip with tall trees, you would still have to have all masonry or 60% masonry.
Well, no, the way that's structured now, proposed, again, this is something that, the reason I brought it up, I wanted everybody to be clear on it. It's 60% of the net facade area. You may have a situation where one building when you look at it straight on from one elevation might be 80%, but you might be less than 60% on some other building elevation.
You're saying the net of the four sides.
It could be modified, but if that is not what your all's thought, you know, where you want this to go, but the intent was to give the designer more flexibility and more creativity in building material allocation around a building.
Mark, I think where we're at today, I think we've had a lot of input and a lot of good discussion, you know, with this. Is going to be, you know, over time, there's always going to be new building materials that come out. And I don't recall which board member it was at the workshop recently to review kind of the final draft of this, but a suggestion was made, you know, maybe every 2 or 3 years, we, you know, revisit this from top to bottom for that reason. And, you know, personally for me, I think it'd be worthwhile to invite in a couple of architects and say, tell us what you're seeing in new trends, what are new materials? Because this will certainly have to be updated. But I think where we're at today, after all the discussion, this is a great starting point. Surely we'll have somebody that will come in and challenge us and educate us, and we will be in a position then, if need be, to modify these accordingly. But I think with all the discussion that we've had up to this point in time, that we're in a really good starting point and something we need to move forward on.
So I'm just trying to understand this.
Yeah.
So if you got a 4-square building and all sides are equal, 3 sides of that building would equal 75%. So that means the back could be non-compliant if the front and the 2 sides.
You could have a situation, as it's currently written, that you could have much less than 60% on some single building elevation. That's correct.
Right, there's no minimum on any of the building elevations.
Now, if that needs to be adjusted in the document, that would be a relatively easy change, although I don't know that may or may not need to go back to the Planning Commission. But, you know, like, for example, in the design requirements for the mixed-use town center, more narrowly written.
Right, I
It
understand
says
that. If we have masonry on 75%, of three sides of it are all masonry, 100%.
then you could have almost none on the 4th elevation potentially, or it'd
What
be
could
much
it,
lower.
what could it be? And I was there at the workshop. We worked through this, but it's a lot to
You could be, you know,
absorb.
20% or less. I mean, it potentially. I mean,
Or none.
Or potentially almost virtually none. Yeah. But it's important to know that there are other things in these standards that would prohibit, I guess, somebody.
Couldn't have a metal back on it.
Yes, there's other components in these standards that talk about, you know, looking at each elevation, you know, and not just the materials. We're looking at the form of the buildings.
Right.
You know, you can have a brick box building. It meets the material requirements, but it's still, if they don't do anything with the building, then it can still be an attractive building. So the standards look at all components of a building, not just the materials. And if somebody came in and tried to put up some kind of you know, material on one elevation, then that's something that we're going to have to compare it to all of the standards comprehensively, and they're going to have a, you know, a pretty in-depth discussion with the Planning Commission about it.
So wherever that 25% is, we do have controls and restrictions that we have in place.
Well, we have other components in the standards that, you know, address building material, building appearance, in addition to just the material requirements. But we can add some language that at no single elevation can have less than some percent of primary material as specified in the, you could certainly do that, and I don't think that would be an unreasonable. I have a little bit of a concern about it, or I wouldn't have brought it up. I think it's something that needs to be talked about.
Well, I think like Mr. Honkin, we've put a lot of effort into this. It's a really good start.
Yeah, it's,
We're going to have to throw it out there, the weak points, if there are any, and where it needs tweaked. So I think given what I understand, I'd be prepared to make a motion that we approve this.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Business items, first is approval of salt purchases from Morton Salt.
Good evening. We have had a few events, as you all know, and we had bought salt. We were full when we started this year. We had a little bit of trouble actually finding our salt, and Jennifer, my assistant, found a way for us to buy this salt through the state contract. We bought the salt the original salt that we bought. That was the $9,621 worth of salt, which was right at 150 tons. The first event that we had this year, we went through about 120 to 130 tons. The reason, the coldness that came in and us trying to get rid of it. Since then, these other events that used about 80 tons out of that original amount, just by the way these things set up. And it depends on the ground temperature, depends on a lot of things. But what we'd like to do is the original board amount was $12,000 to purchase salt in my snow removal budget. What we're requesting tonight is to buy an additional 225 tons of salt with an estimated cost of $15,750. By buying this through Morton, it will exceed our $10,000 threshold, which we're required to do bids unless it's already bid by the state bid contract. And this salt is bought through them with a bid number, which saves us time and money in our purchases. And we can do this in a lot of different areas that we buy things, equipment and things like that. But what we're asking for tonight is for the board to approve this additional purchase of salt, 225 tons. The estimated cost would be $15,750. We do not want to, put a stipulation. We won't exceed this amount to purchase this salt. And what we're looking for is approval from you all tonight to be able to purchase this through the state bid contract from Morton Salt.
What's the price per ton on this purchase?
$70 per ton.
And the last one was $65?
$70 per ton.
So it's the same?
Yes, sir. It's exactly the same price.
I'll move for approval.
Second?
Aye.
Approval of replacement of the existing Old Stage Hills entrance sign.
All right, let me get my. I got it mixed in with my other stuff. Here it is. Sorry about that. This request before you, I'm sure everybody's familiar with this sign. It's at the intersection of Way Station Trail and Kingston Pike. The request is the stone veneer and the sign face of this sign. This sign actually predates the town, and it's really in a condition of disrepair. It's at a point now where really you can't perform normal maintenance on it. It really needs to either be removed or completely replaced. And what they're requesting is to replace it with a new sign that would maintain the existing foundation. That's, the placement of it's not changing. They're just changing the veneer to a red brick. And then it would be a granite sign face. All the dimensions of the sign, as I understand it, are the same as what's out there. Whenever this was initially brought to my attention, since this sign is in the middle of the public right-of-way, it, under our sign ordinance, in order for it to be altered other than normal maintenance, it has to be presented to the governing body, the Board of Mayor and Aldermen of the town, because you all have jurisdiction over the town's rights-of-ways. And this is similar request to what has been presented in the past for some older subdivisions in the town that had signs in public rights-of-ways, like Kingsgate, Linda Heights, Concord Hills replaced one of their signs a few years ago in the middle of their right-of-way down at the entrance. And so it's also similar to what was approved a few months ago for the high school entrance sign off of North Campbell Station Road. The staff did look into any potential liability concerns with approving a replacement sign. And since the proposed sign would be in the exact same location as the existing sign is more than 5 feet away from the curb of the median in all directions. And the proposed sign would be the same. There wasn't deemed to be any liability concerns with approving a replacement. What they're wanting to do as well as just replace the sign is to upgrade that median area as well with some new landscaping and some external lighting. And all that would have to go before, including the sign, if approved, allowed to be in the right-of-way by you all, would have to go to the Visual Resources Review Board for approval of the appearance of the sign, the landscaping, and the external lighting. The staff does recommend approval of this request, and I think the applicant is here if you have any questions for them.
Do we have a concept drawing of what's proposed?
Yeah, it's basically that.
It's going to be a big improvement.
I think it's the brick that would, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the brick that would match the bank building, the 4-story building.
I'll make a motion then that we approve the replacement of the subdivision entrance sign to the Old Stage Hill subdivisions,
I'll
subject
second.
to the staff's recommendation.
Do we have a second? Okay.
All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye. I would like to make a suggestion that that you spend maybe $20 more and buy some shaped bricks for the top of that to give it a little bit of little bit of finesse.
Town administrators report.
Thank you, Mayor. Just got word that last week one of our building officials, Elliot Sievers, was named the East Tennessee Building Official of the Year. And so that's an award given by his peers, and I know that's a great award that Elliot's been here a long time and does a great job for the town, and we really appreciate his service. Two other things. One is on next Monday and Tuesday, myself, Mayor McGill, Vice Mayor LaMarche, and Alderman Pinchuk will all be in Nashville at the TML Legislative Conference meeting with our legislators. And so we're looking forward to going to Nashville for that. And also next Saturday is the Shamrock Ball, which is the father-daughter dance at Farragut High School at 7 o'clock. And my daughter is looking forward to me stepping on her toes all night long. So anyway, that should be a great event, and we're really looking forward to having a good turnout for that. That's all I have tonight.
All right.
And we have no attorneys, so
Time for Ron. Yeah, I'll tell you what.